Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm going to walk you through the front lines, but just before I do, I'm going to just have a little bit of a discussion about the missiles that went off the other night, morning really, as Russia replied to the Kerch Bridge being hit by the Ukrainians. There was some people say indiscriminate, other people say very discriminate barrage of missiles on Ukraine, right across Ukraine, in lots of major cities. In fact, here is one small map showing, this one showing you where Ukraine was hit. I think it was hit in more places than that as well. So there was about 80 plus missiles and kamikaze drones and whatnot sent over to various locations in Ukraine. Somewhere around 40 to 50% of them were supposedly shot down, as according to the Ukrainians. However, that means there were still as many as 40 to 50 rockets that landed. Quite how precise they were is up for debate. So yesterday, please check out yesterday's videos. I discussed, or at least Dom Nichols from the Ukraine the Latest podcast discussed something called CEP, circular error probable. This is how you measure precision of missiles. It turns out that something can be precise if it hits within, if 50% of the missiles hit within their, intended area. So in something like a quite inaccurate KH-22 cruise missile, I think they've got like a 300-meter precision circle. Right, so if you intend to hit one building, if you can hit 300 meters around the point that you are intended to hit, then that is precise. And it's not just that, but if 50% of the missiles hit within that circle, then it is precise. That means that 50%. So if you're sending 6 missiles, 3 of them can hit within 300 meters, and 3 of them can hit anywhere else in the world, right? And that's still precise. Now, the more modern the missile, the more precise it is, and that circle is reduced, or as in 300 meters becomes, 30 meters, becomes 10 meters. So the more precise the missile, the more precise your firing is, and the amount that you can, the percentage you can hit your target, and the more exactly you're going to hit the target on point rather than just in a 300-meter radius. Anyway, that's CEP. Now, what happened with these strikes is that a whole bunch of energy infrastructure particularly was hit, a load of substations, and this means that the energy provision right across the whole network of energy right across Ukraine has been at least temporarily disabled. Ukraine also sells energy abroad, particularly from the west of Ukraine, and this earns them quite a pretty penny, considering a lot of their economy has been decimated. So it's really important for the Ukrainians. They're getting sort of $15 million plus a day in selling energy. Then that's very, very useful. For the energy infrastructure to be hit, I mean, as terrible as these hits were from a Ukrainian and international point of view, because a lot of these missiles would have gone astray or been shot down and landed in places that were not the intended targets. So you had a lot of civilian infrastructure taken out, but a lot of energy infrastructure. So from a Russian point of view, this is quite clever, as in it debilitates Ukraine, the Ukrainian economy. If you've got no power, you've got no machinery, you've got nothing can work. So they are, from their point of view, they're thinking, well, job done. We've done a pretty good job. They've also hit in Kiev itself. They hit the building of the Secret Service. So again, a fairly strategic target. I'm not saying, this is great, well done, Russia. I'm saying that if you are Russian, thinking from their point of view, and the new commander in charge of the Ukrainian forces, the butcher of Syria, as he is known, you have, where he was in charge of, such hits on Aleppo and certainly indiscriminate hits in Syria, then this is par for the course. And this is quite a big hit for the Ukrainians, to be honest. So the question is, how did the Ukrainians bounce back? is this escalatory? So do the Ukrainians now say, right, we need surface-to-air missiles? Okay, they've already got NASAMS. So these are the Norwegian or National Advanced Surface-to-Air Systems that the Americans and Norwegians have co-produced and designed. These have been very useful. Those are being used at the moment. They need more. Yes, of course they need more. For months now, the Ukrainians have been saying, we need surface-to-air missile defense. Okay, is this now the time that ATACMS come in? So these can be fired out of your HIMARS rocket systems, and they have a much, much longer range. So instead of, uh, well, they've got what, 300-kilometer range, is it? So yeah, 300 kilometers. So that, you can hit most places in Ukraine. So instead of having a 70-kilometer range, it's a 300-kilometer range. Okay, that would be a game changer, because then suddenly the Kerch Bridge can be hit, with greater ease by missile, rather than sending a truck over, or however it was taken out. Because at the moment, yes, this is great. This is and you can listen to the joy of these guys using a manpad, a shoulder held rocket launcher, to hit a cruise missile.
Идет! Ваня, давай! Давай, сука, падай! Да, бля! Да!
The sheer joy of those guys as they took out a what appears to be a cruise missile with a manpad, it's just insane. However, you can't have people standing around with manpads looking out for cruise missiles on the off chance that one's just going to pop overhead and take a pop at it. Yeah, there are quite a few manpads in Ukraine now, but that's not gonna work. You need a really decent air defense system operating right throughout Ukraine. And these IRIS systems that the Germans have provided, and the NASAMS, create a kind of network of launchers that work as a system, and they are much more effective, and exactly what the Ukrainians need. But they just need an absolute ton of them. So this has been a challenging couple of days for Ukraine in terms of what this will have done to their spirits, and what this will have done to their capabilities, given the energy infrastructure has been hit, and hit badly. You get some people saying, nobody has won war through conventional mid-range missiles terror. Russia will only prove this rule. And I generally agree. However, this has been strategically possibly useful for Russia. It was although some of those missiles were woefully inaccurate and didn't reach their targets, some of them did reach their targets and have caused some pain for the Ukrainians. The other worry that's going on at the moment is all this talk about Belarus. And there is quite a lot of talk. So just before we get onto the front lines, this is absolutely necessary to mention, because you are going to start. Are we going to start seeing Ukrainians moving troops away from certain areas, or away from defensive positions in certain cities, towards the Belarusian border? There is a lot of chatter going on. So this is a known Belarusian. This is Jason J. Smart, who's a known Belarusian source tells me Russian soldiers are entering Belarus by the trainload. They're traveling in cattle cars, just a huge quantity, just waves of trains arriving. And this fits in with what Tim White has been hearing too. This forces Ukraine to have more troops in the north instead of pushing south. ABC News here: Russian troops to assemble in Belarus as Alexander Lukashenko, so he's the leader of Belarus, not particularly democratically elected, threatens Ukraine. Belarusian President Lukashenko said on Monday that some of his country's 60,000 strong army will deploy alongside Russian troops in Belarus. There is possibly an awful lot of conscripted troops, mobilized troops amassing here. We are now hearing mobilized troops are turning up and down the front lines. We are also hearing that there are conscripted troops being trained within the occupied borders to some meaningful degree. So there are training centers going on and mobilized troops hitting the front lines, and now the Belarusians are flexing their muscles. Is that Lukashenko trying to straddle both fences, straddle the fence here, in having a feet in both sort of gardens, so to speak, having a foot in both gardens, where he is, trying to appease Putin and say, look, yeah, we're here to support you, but not really supporting. That's essentially what has happened. He's allowed the Russians to launch attacks from Belarus, but hasn't actually actively sent his own troops and munitions in. Well, there is now evidence that he is supplying Russia with tanks. There's been video footage of tanks going from Belarus to Russia, and this is something of a worry. So, reactivated T-72A tanks headed for Russia spotted in Belarus. So here is the video. Lots of tanks on trains heading towards Russia, and this is, again, the Ukrainians will be keeping an eye on this, thinking, "Oh my goodness, okay, an absolute ton more armaments." Obviously, do they have to train people to use them? How are they going to use them? How effective are these going to be? Yeah, but they are. This is equipment being sent to the front line in the same way that mobilized troops. This is what I've said in the last few weeks: is that yes, these mobilized troops aren't going to be the best troops you've ever seen, but at the same time, they are boots on the ground, and they can be used to help, support at least defensive front lines, but possibly offensive moves as well. And we'll come on to that in a second. Now, these rocket attacks may have also dented Russia's appeal abroad, and particularly in former Soviet states. Here we have Georgians taken to the streets in Tbilisi, in their capital, to show their dislike for what the Russians are doing and their support for Ukraine. This is obviously not going to be well received in Moscow, but there you go. So support for Ukraine in Georgia. Could there be an opportunistic move in Georgia? We shall see. Right, front lines. Sorry it's taken so long. Okay, the Kupiansk to Kreminna front line. So this is what the war mapper shows, but it's potentially inaccurate. There are Russian sources saying, and I'll come on to this in a second, that there's been some successful counterattacks down to the southern end of that. In fact, let's get onto that right now. So here we have, just to give you an idea, this is Kreminna here, up to Svatove. So this Kreminna area is what this map is showing here. So we have Kreminna, and we have Torske. So if you remember the map, so here's the map I did days ago, and when Liman fell, it was encircled. Okay, it was surrounded. Yampil was taken, and you had this tiny corridor of Zarechne and Torske here. That these two settlements were what were the opening that allowed the Russians from Liman to escape. Everywhere else was taken. I had Terny on the other side of these lakes, Terny, Torska, and then eventually Dobrova. Well, it turns out that according to pro-Russian sources, Terny, Torska, and Dobrova have been recaptured in a counteroffensive. I talked to you yesterday about a counteroffensive, two places, two prongs, but I hadn't seen any evidence of that. I still haven't seen any photographic evidence of this. So I'm unsure of exactly how to account for this, but this is what it potentially looks like now. Terny, Torska, and Dobrova under Russian occupation. However, there is also evidence that they are still bombarding Terny with artillery, the Russians. So if the Russians are bombarding Terny with artillery, as there are some claims online at the moment, then it's unlikely that they occupy it. And so I don't know is the answer. There probably is counterattacks going on here, but whether these are actually occupied successfully by the Russians is another question. Now we know that the Wagner Group have sent a battalion up here to support some of the defense of Severodonetsk. It could be that these guys are operational here and behind the successes of the Russian, if they are successes. It leaves them open to possibly being flanked around the side and getting cut off in this forested area here or further north. I don't know. Is that wishful thinking? Are there enough Ukrainian troops here to really do the job of not only defending here, but attacking this conurbation? I've long said that I don't think they have enough troops to do that, and the only thing that they can realistically do is try for an encirclement, and I would go for Starobilsk and Svatove. So it turns out that that's so far what's going on. It turns out that Svatove, which is here, so here's Kupiansk to Svatove. Let's give you an understanding of what I'm doing. So Kupiansk is up here, Svatove is down here. And I said this front line is pretty messy. We're not 100% sure which village or town at which point is in whose hands. But it's not some nice contiguous front line. It appears that the Russians are, some pro-Russian channels are saying Kiev Sharivka. There are being some pushes from the Russians down towards there. And Kupiansk is still under artillery attack. And then there are other claims that Svatove is under artillery attack. And then, in fact, the Ukrainians are pushing towards Trevnivy. Sorry, my Ukrainian isn't as good as it should be, from Petropavlivka here. So there are some movements of the Ukrainians here and towards Vilshana yesterday, but Russians pushing back further down south. This is going to be a bit messy, and things aren't sorted out at the moment. It's not wholly clear. So there you go. There's potentially movements on this front, and potentially some loss of territory by the Ukrainians to the Russians, but that is visually unconfirmed. And pro-Russian channels have a tendency to overestimate, overinflate, and effectively lie. So we're going to go down. That was this area up here. So let's now expand that. That was the area we were dealing with. I'm now going to move down to Bakhmut. This Bakhmut area. Yesterday, I said that these villages have been lost, and this little town, Zaitsevo, town village thing, was lost. Someone said they disagreed with that, and they thought it was still contested. It appears pretty clearly now that that is under Russian control. And in fact, you've got Pedorodny up here contested, and it looks like Bakhmut will fall, in my opinion, because there have been apparently emergency services and police have been evacuated from Bakhmut on the Ukrainian side. So if that is happening, then they are prepping the area they're prepping the town to be taken. The Wagner PMC are in the eastern suburbs, and they are looking to, the Russian forces are looking to encircle as well as go through. Now, that's bad news for the Ukrainians. However, Bakhmut has successfully done what I guess Ukrainians would have wanted it to do, which is to hold up an awful lot of Russian troops for a very long time. They have taken such a long time to take this place, and it's been very expensive for them in terms of time, effort, troops, and equipment. This is what the Ukrainians did up here, which is withdraw, but in a way that's very costly for the Russians. So I think if Bakhmut does fall, yes, that is bad news for the Ukrainians, but actually it's probably been, a successful, very slow withdrawal for them and costing the Russians a lot. We can go further down south to Donetsk, and there is this little push by the Russians outside of Donetsk to Bisky, and another town just next to that. That is, the Russians continue to push there, and there are small advances in that direction. So that is again a continuation. As far as the Kherson front is concerned, again, not a lot of move. I told you yesterday about 2 attacks that the Ukrainians put together that were repelled. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians did lose some equipment there. This is possibly represented the fact that the Russians have fairly successfully dug in. And it appears not just dug in across this line, which is broadly this line here, and I'm not sure what's going on around this little salient there. Just there's not a lot of news coming out of Kherson, but it appears that the Russians have also put a second line of defense back here. Okay, the Ukrainians do have longer range artillery that should be able to take off the Russian artillery. The problem is, and I've talked about this before, and if you want a really good breakdown of this, the War in Ukraine YouTube channel often talks about how good the Orlan 10 drones and Orlan 30 drones, but Orlan 10 drones are at reconnaissance and working well for the Russians, because these drones are really cheap. They've got really long flight time, and they can go quite high as well without freezing, all sorts of stuff like that. They're just cheap and cheerful, but very, very useful pieces of kit. And the Ukrainians, and they're embedded within the Russian forces, 10 a penny. Well, the Ukrainians don't really have an equivalent bunch of cheap drones. They're getting off the shelf drones, but these are not petrol driven. They're usually, battery operated. They don't have as long in the air, and so on and so forth. They're just not as useful for the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians they do have better capabilities with their artillery, but it can't. The artillery is only as good as the visuals you're getting, as the reconnaissance you're getting. So if they're not getting brilliant reconnaissance, and they are shooting blind, or they're relying on the ground reconnaissance units breaking through, sighting targets, and then relaying that back to the artillery, and that is it's just not as good as aerial reconnaissance. So they have better weaponry, but not better eyes, and the Russians have better eyes, but not as good weaponry. And is that some kind of leveler? Quite possibly. You would hope that the longer range Caesars and Crabs and Panzer howitzers are able to take, and Zuzannas are able to take out Russian targets effectively, but we shall see. One thinks that this is a Greek tragedy waiting to happen, and now with the Kerch Bridge being affected, but then possibly being rebuilt rather quickly, our supplies to these troops are already, limited, given that the Ukraine has taken out all of these bridges and pontoons and ferries. Well, there is talk that there is some ability to cross the Novokakhovka Dam here again. But then that will probably be hit again. This is arguably a Greek tragedy waiting to happen, but it's just a matter of time. Anyway, that's my analysis. Not a lot, but still a lot to talk about, especially with regard to the cruise missile attacks that Russia petulantly hit back at Ukraine with. I just want to show you Yes, I do want to show you that. I want to lead you towards one of my articles on Only Sky, an article I wrote last night on the Kerch Bridge. So please check it out. There are other Russian Ukrainian articles. So Biden, we are facing the prospect of Armageddon. So talking about nuclear war. Can Putin, locked in a bubble of bad intel, spin his way out of disaster? It's talking about misinformation, disinformation surrounding Putin. But this one I wrote yesterday is the Kerch Bridge. What can we learn from it? Just discussing the ramifications of the Kerch Bridge being hit, and why it's important, what we can take from it, and where the Russians or the Ukrainians go from there. So anyway, check that out. That's on onlysky.media/jpierce/ blah, 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 blah. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks for all your support. Hope this has been somewhat useful for you. Please let me know in the comments where I go wrong, where you disagree, or where you agree. Please like, subscribe, join if you can, support in any way possible. All the details for PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee and anything are down in the description. But just the main thing is you guys being here. Thanks for your support. All the best, and I will try to get an extra out today, but I've got a super busy day with other stuff going on, family and other commitments. So I might not be able to get the extra out, but if I do, happy days.